Hey all, Tom Moran here from Tom's Big Spiders. So back in July of 2017, I sat down and tried to come up with a list of, at the time, my top 5 favorite old world tarantulas. It was just supposed to be for fun and kind of like a brain teaser for me to try to figure out which of all these species that I absolutely love are my absolute favorites. Well, it's been several years. I've had other people come onto that video, see that video and go, hey, A, why didn't you do top 10? Or B, why don't you do it again, revisit it and see if it changed? And it has changed over the course of the years. A couple of years ago, I actually revisited the topic on my podcast and came up with a new list, which I immediately regretted because for me, I love all my spiders and it's very difficult for me to narrow it down to just a handful of my supposed favorites. But anyway, we're gonna give it another try now that we're in 2022. I sat down, went through the podcast lists again, made a couple tweaks, and now I offer to you my list of top 12, well, kind of top 13. You'll see when we get into it. Favorite old world spiders. Now, just a warning ahead of time because I know people get very passionate about the species of spiders that they love. This is not a best list or best of list. This is a list of my personal favorites. These are the ones that I like. Sometimes I can't even articulate why I like them so much. So for folks that have species that don't make it on the list, please don't be offended. I love all tarantulas, everything I've ever kept. And in this case, I'm just trying to pick the ones that stand out a little bit above the others. And keep in mind, this list changes as time goes on and I keep more species. Or as you'll see when you get into the actual list and we get down to like number 1, there are some species that a couple years ago really weren't my favorite and now they are. So please keep that in mind when you go through this. So enough of me talking. Let's get into my list of my top 12 or top 13 favorite old world tarantulas. So let's go ahead and just get this piece of business out of the way before we begin the list. As most of my followers know, I'm a huge fan of the genus Poecilotheria, and every time I try to do a list of my favorite old world tarantulas, it's almost impossible for me not to fill it with pokies. The last time I attempted such a list, I had a Poecilotheria species as my number 1, and if I'm being honest, that wouldn't change today. Therefore, to make things a little more interesting, we're going to treat this list as more of my top 12 old world spiders that aren't pokies. That way, it'll open this video up to include some of my favorite species that might not have made the list otherwise. Yes, long story short, I'm going to cheat. However, I can't make this video and not include pokies, so to kick it off, I offer up my choice for my favorite Poecilotheria species. Today, that honor goes to the Poecilotheria vittata, or ghost ornamental. This stunner from India and Sri Lanka was the first Poecilotheria species that I ever kept and was directly responsible for me falling in love with the genus. Lithe, regal, and possessing a cryptic fractal patterning that provides them with natural camouflage, pokies just seem to be in a league of their own. Although the P. metallica tends to get all the attention due to its blue coloration, I've always had a thing for spiders with black, white, and gray. And it's these brilliant monochromatic tones that give the P. vittata its common name of ghost ornamental. I currently have 2 females in my collection, and they will always be favorites. So there you have it, my choice for favorite pokey, at least for today. Ask me tomorrow, and it could be the P. regalis, the P. metallica, the P. rufulata, the P. subfusca. This is always so difficult. Anyway, now that we have that out of the way, it's time for the rest of this list. The first species on the list, the Selenocosmia crassipes, comes from Australia and has long been one of my favorites. I learned of the Queensland whistling tarantula, or the barking spider, years ago when some slings went up for sale on a vendor's website. After doing some research, I discovered that only a handful of Australian species were ever imported into the US, and spiders from this continent were particularly difficult to find in my country. I snatched up 2 slings that quickly became 2 of my favorite spiders in my collection. Fast, secretive burrowers, the S. crassipes rarely come out of their burrows, and my glimpses of them out and about are quite rare. Voracious eaters, the species grows at a moderate pace, and both males and females are long-lived. When threatened, the species can stridulate, making a loud noise to deter predators, hence the name barking spider. Now, many ask why I'm so enamored with the spider that I rarely see. Well, as anyone who keeps fossorial spiders can tell you, those moments when you do see them out in all their glory are so thrilling, they make keeping them totally worth it. Although I may not have a lot of footage of my crassipes, I've very much enjoyed the comedic game of cat and mouse we've played over the years, as I've tried to get video of them. The next species on the list holds the distinction of being a European tarantula due to it being found on the island country of Cyprus. The Chitapelma Alavasium, or Middle East gold or black furry tarantula, is also found in Turkey, Sudan, Egypt, and the Middle East, and has a reputation for being quite the spitfire. I first discovered this species on the YouTube channel World of Spiders, where a video showed off a huge colony of these tarantulas living in an old tomb. From that point on, I was absolutely obsessed with getting some, and I finally got my opportunity in late 2019. Since then, I've had one that is now a mature male, and the other, well, fingers crossed for me that it's a lady. Both have been great eaters, have grown fairly quickly, and have gone through awesome color changes throughout their lives. Now, the general consensus is that this species is one of the more defensive spiders available, with folks saying their spiders will throw up threat postures with little provocation. I've been fortunate in that my two are very skittish, but not particularly defensive. Many note that there are darker and lighter versions of this species, likely due to regional variation. I've heard that the darker version, like the one shown here, is generally found in Cyprus, and the gold variant is found in the Middle East. Whatever the case, both versions are quite attractive and would make excellent additions to any Old World aficionado's collection. As I mentioned earlier, I just find black and white tarantulas to be incredibly striking. It should be no shock then that the Heteroscodra maculata or Togo starburst baboon makes it on my list of favorite old worlds. This medium-sized African arboreal sports stunning whites, blacks, and grays that make it a true standout amongst monochrome spiders. I got my first HMAC several years into the hobby, and it didn't take me long to realize what I'd been missing. Unfortunately, this species has a reputation for being very defensive and willing to bite, which drives away many potential keepers. I found that my two are actually more shy and willing to hide within the copiously webbed confines of their burrows rather than stand and fight. That said, I do catch my two girls out quite a bit, which is great because they're so darn lovely. Although some folks report having issues raising HMAC slings, juveniles and adults are quite hardy. I've found that mine ate well, grew relatively quickly, and are generally great hunters. If given a setup that allows for them to hide and web, a keeper should have little issue with them. Also, as a fun fact, this is Billy's favorite tarantula species. I have two adult females of the next species on my list, and they are two of my favorite girls out of all of my spiders. The Hysterocratis Gigas, or Cameroon red baboon, is one big, beautiful old world spider. With a sleek, velvety appearance and beefy overall build, the spider can reach a leg span of 7 inches or larger as an adult. That's one huge baboon. Considered to be a moisture-dependent species, the H. gigas will even submerge itself in water to hide or to fish. In a recent video in which I broke down the fastest growing tarantulas that I've raised, the H. gigas easily made the list. My girls went from less than 1-inch slings to over 4 inches in a single year, which is quite fantastic growth. Like most fossorial old world tarantulas, the H. gigas are quite shy if given the proper setup. Namely, they need plenty of moist substrate to dig and burrow in. I don't see mine out often, but when I do, they are usually quite calm and will sometimes even feed in front of me, like the one in this video here. A true hobby staple, the H. gigas is usually readily available and inexpensive if bought as a sling. Sadly, I think this is the reason that a lot of hobbyists pass it up, and those that do are really missing out. As an added perk, folks have had some success keeping slings from the same sack together communally. In my opinion, the H. gigas is one of the coolest old world species on the market and will always be a favorite of mine. The newest species on this list, the Berubis Simaroxagorum, or Cerelac blue, is an absolutely dazzling spider from Borneo. Juveniles and mature males sport brilliant electric blue legs that seem to glow under almost any lighting. I received 2 slings back in early 2020, and I was elated to discover that not only were they great eaters, but they grew quite quickly. Burrowers by nature, both of my B. Simaroxagorums constructed burrows with 2 entrances. Although they spend quite a bit of time hiding, and they will usually retreat to their burrows when disturbed, I have always managed to catch mine out quite a bit. And that's great, as their life builds, cream-colored bodies, and azure appendages make them quite the beauties. While discussing the bee Simaroxagorum, I'd be remiss not to mention the controversy that surrounds this species. Shortly after being officially described in 2019, the spider immediately entered the hobby from adults that were arguably poached from the wild. Many will point to this species as a prime example of how the tarantula trade assists in depleting local tarantula populations. Luckily, this species seems to be easily reproduced in captivity, and captive bred specimens are more readily available. However, for many, the taint of the bee Simaroxagorum's arrival into the hobby is just too much. The next spider gets a lot of attention for its adorable blue feet. However, many are surprised to learn that its hunting behavior is perhaps its most striking attribute. The Idiothelli mira, or Bluefoot Baboon, is one of a handful of tarantula species that make trapdoors. I'll admit, when I picked up my first eye mirror sling several years ago, it was because of the blue. However, it was one day while feeding my little one that I got the most amazing surprise that really moved the spider up on my list. After dropping a cricket in, I noticed that the spider had apparently filled in its burrow entrance. As I reached for my tongs to remove the cricket, as the spider was obviously in pre-molt, it burst from a hidden trapdoor, grabbed the insect, and quickly disappeared again. I couldn't run the billy fast enough to tell her what I had just seen. The eye mira is a fossorial species, meaning that they need deep substrate in order to create their burrows. Although they usually stay out of sight, patient keepers that hang around after dropping in a prey item will likely be rewarded by seeing them trapdoor hunt. Although the eye mira is an old world, meaning they can be quick and pack a painful bite, they are very, very shy and should pose no problems if kept properly. Check out a list of the best old world species for keepers to start with, and you're likely to find the Ceratogyrus darlingi, or rear horn baboon, mentioned. I picked up my first 3 many years ago and was a bit disappointed when all 3 ended up maturing out as tiny little males. Luckily, I'd be much more fortunate with my next 2 slings, and I now have 2 beautiful adult females. Maxing out at around 5 inches, adult C. darlingi sport earthy brown, gold, gray, and black tones. However, their coloration is not their most distinctive feature. This species sports a dark curved protuberance on its carapace called a foveal horn that gives it its common name. Many keepers are just smitten with this unique feature, and you can count me amongst this group. Keepers often report that the species is generally a bit more laid back than most old world tarantulas, and I've found that my 2 are rather calm and shy. Although the species is fossorial, with most specimens creating a labyrinth of tunnels with multiple burrow entrances, they are also quite the prolific webbers. Now that I have my 2 girls, I consider myself part of the fan club for these unique and awesome little old worlds. If I were to make a list of spiders that I wish were available in the hobby, this species would now be my number 1. Sadly, I haven't seen them offered in a few years, and I've never seen slings for sale. It's a shame, as this old world species is one of the coolest and most docile spiders I keep. I'm of course talking about the Kratocellus Packypus, or the stout-legged baboon tarantula. Back in 2012, I purchased 2 juveniles after discovering the species on a list of the best beginner baboon species. As luck would have it, both specimens were females, and I now have 2 beautiful adult ladies. A smaller, slow-growing species, the E. Packypus's most distinguishing feature is its super thick and fluffy back legs, which it uses to propel itself out of its vertical burrow when hunting. I've often remarked that those beefy, fluffy legs remind me of the legs of a satyr. Although they are a shy fossorial species, I catch my 2 out all the time. When disturbed, they just slowly turn around and mosey on over to their burrows to hide. It's truly adorable. Mine have always been good eaters, and watching them explode from their burrows to grab their prey will never get old. Honestly, the next species on this list could easily be my number 1 on a different day, and if I did a poll of keepers' favorite old worlds, it would likely grab the top spot. When I first saw photos of the Monocentropus Belfry, or the Socotra Island blue baboon, it was still a newer, rare species coveted for its cream-colored body, pearl-esque carapace, and brilliant blue legs. I got my first trio as juveniles back in 2012 and was immediately enamored with these secretive old worlds. Although they were quite reclusive and a bit picky as eaters, it wasn't long before they were sporting the blue legs that keepers covet them for. I kept my 3 separately as they matured into 2 males and a female, and they quickly became one of my favorite species. It was while researching another spider that I first learned that keepers had experienced success in keeping the M. balfouri in a communal setup, and I immediately became intrigued by the idea. In June of 2016, I set up an M. balfouri communal of 9 slings in order to chronicle their growth and interactions and to hopefully provide keepers with proof that they could be kept together successfully. Documenting the progress with monthly updates, I was amazed by just how well these communal specimens did. All 9 made it to adulthood, with 4 males and 5 females. Today, my 5 girls are still living together in their enclosure and are doing great, and this was easily one of the most rewarding experiences with keeping tarantulas I have ever had. Now, many folks keep their own M. balfouri communals, and we're still learning more about how this amazing animal socializes. When you couple its brilliant coloration with its social tendencies, it's hard not to love the Monocentropus Belfry. The next species on my list has long been a favorite of mine, and like many, could be my top pick on another day. I can still remember seeing my first photos of the Harpactira pulchripes, or golden blue leg baboon, on a forum, and thinking it was one of the most beautiful spiders that I'd ever seen. There was just something about the contrast of those metallic blue legs against the fiery gold body coloration that made it a truly gorgeous tarantula. In 2014, after prices finally started to come down a bit on this species, I purchased a sex juvenile female in a sling, spending the most I had ever spent on a spider at that time. They proved well worth the money, as this stunning and hardy old world soon became one of my favorite all-time species. Although the H. pulchripes is usually a burrower, mine would also do quite a bit of webbing on the surface and have been quite visible. My girl, now an adult female, hasn't used a burrow for years and can always be found sitting on the surface. My juvenile is a bit more shy, but she is sitting right out in the open as I speak. Although temperaments may vary, my H. pulchripes have all been skittish but not at all defensive. Super fast and quick to bolt as slings, they usually calm down a bit as they put on some size. As a result, they are often recommended to folks looking to keep their first old world species. With such a striking appearance and a more calm demeanor, it's no wonder so many hobbyists love the H. pulchripes. So as anyone who has watched my channel knows, I love the color orange. Therefore, it should come as no surprise that I have an affinity for orange spiders as well. From the Philippines, the Orphanacus philippinus, or Philippine tangerine, is, in my opinion, one of the most stunning tarantulas available today. I purchased my first 2 well-started slings way back in late 2013, and those 2 carrot-colored beauties quickly became all-time favorites. In fact, when it was time to come up with a header for my Tom's Big Spiders website, I chose this species as the unofficial mascot. The orange TBS logo was even inspired by the coloration of this spider. As a result, this species will always hold a special place in my heart. The O. philippinus starts off as a little brown sling and starts getting some of its fiery oranges when it hits about 1.5 inches or 1.75 inches. At that point, the colors get more and more intense as it matures to adulthood. At around 5 inches, this sleek fossorial tarantula will spend much of its time in its burrow, but expect some webbing around the surface as well. Mine have been quite high-strung and will usually bolt to their burrows if disturbed. That said, I do catch them out quite a bit, meaning that there is plenty of time for me to admire their beauty. Back in late 2019, I produced a sack for my female, and seeing all those little brown babies was a true high point in the hobby for me. This little girl right here is actually one of the babies from this sack, and she has taken over for Mom as being the poster child for Tom's Big Spiders. Man, have things changed over the years. Back when I first attempted to make a list of my then top 5 favorite old worlds in 2014, this species didn't even make it on the list. Now, in 2022, it has claimed the top spot. This tarantula has long been the problem child of the hobby due to its terrible reputation for being super defensive and nasty and a propensity to attract thrill-hunting keepers. The top spot on this list goes to the Tarina Kailis Mirinus, or the infamous OBT. I got my first OBT over 10 years ago as a small sling, and over the years she became one of my all-time favorite tarantulas. I totally lucked out with this girl, as she has always been very coy and laid back and has never given me an issue. Sadly, much of the species' bad reputation comes from the spiders being miskept or from folks not giving them the respect that they deserve. The fact is, if given space to burrow and to web on the surface, most P. Mirinus would much rather hide than stand their ground and fight. However, if cornered or agitated, this species will not hesitate to use its speed and potent venom to make a predator or sloppy keeper regret it. This is why the OBT is usually recommended for keepers who have some experience under their belts. Ironically, the first time I ever encountered this species was on a top 10 list of the best beginner tarantula species. Let that one soak in. Although I was immediately struck by its gorgeous orange coloration, I soon learned that most considered the P. Mirinus to be an advanced species. Not a fan of orange? There are several variants of the P. Mirinus available, including ones that are tan, blackish, or even golden. This beauty seen right here is my P. Mirinus Tet variant, and to say that I was shocked at her yellowish color would be an understatement. Those who see through its exaggerated reputation will find a lot to love with the P. Mirinus or OBT. So there they are, and honestly, even just going around the tarantula room now and looking at some other ones, I'm second guessing it. It's a tough one for me because I love Poecilotheria species, which is why I did the cop-out and kind of put them first and then went into the list, because my list could easily be dominated with Poecilotheria species. And then there was one species I took off the list that I had originally had on the podcast, which was the Harpactera caffreriana. I absolutely love these guys, but I didn't want two from the same genus on it. I wanted to kind of mix it up, but that's another one I love. And I'll probably end up doing it in another 5 to 10 years, and I'm sure at that point it will change. So what I would love people to do, rather than get mad at me because maybe a species they love didn't make the list, make your own list and post it below. I'd love to see what other people have on their lists. I'm sure some will have some similar ones to mine. I'm sure there'll be some different ones. I'm sure somebody will come up with something that makes me smack my head and go, how did I not think of that species? But I'd absolutely love to hear from all of you and find out what are your favorite old world spiders. And if you're somebody who isn't keeping old world tarantulas yet and you just want to list some of your favorite new worlds, that would work as well. As a matter of fact, that's my next endeavor, to try to go back and revisit the list of my favorite new worlds. That one's kicking me in the butt though, so that might be a while. So that will do it for this one. As always, if you liked it enough to subscribe, very much appreciate. Click the little circle up in here. I will put 2 other videos in here. Maybe I'll put the original top 5 list down here just for giggles. As always, if you take the time to comment, I will respond. Just know it can take me a couple days. Guys, stay safe. We'll catch you all next time.